The rain fell in a steady, dispiriting drizzle, each drop streaking down the greasy windows of the corner spoon like a tear. For Maya, the diner felt less like a place of work and more like a cage made of cracked linoleum and the lingering smell of stale coffee. The gray sky outside was a perfect mirror for the landscape of her heart, a washed-out vista of worry and weariness. She was a single mother, a truth that was both her greatest pride and her heaviest burden. Her son, Leo, was the sun in her sky, but his light was shadowed by a persistent, rattling cough that echoed in her ears long after she'd tucked him into bed. The doctors had used words like chronic and specialist, words that carried the invisible weight of dollar signs she simply did not have. Every day was a frantic, silent calculation. Rent was due. The light bill was a glaring red notice on the fridge. And Leo's latest prescription was a small, white paper bag that had cost her the week's grocery money. She survived on the kindness of a meager salary and the fickle generosity of strangers' tips. Today, generosity was in short supply. The diner was nearly empty, a ghost ship adrift in the afternoon gloom. Two old men nursed their coffees in a corner booth, their conversation a low, unintelligible murmur. A trucker sat at the counter, staring blankly at the rain-slicked street. Maya moved between them like a phantom, her smile a thin, brittle mask she put on with her apron. Inside, she was crumbling. The tips in her pocket felt like a handful of pebbles, light, cold, and utterly useless against the tidal wave of her debts. Her boss, Mr. Henderson, did little to help. He was a man whose soul had shriveled to the size of a balance sheet. He watched her from his small office, his eyes like those of a hawk searching for any flaw, any excuse to trim her hours or dock her pay. He saw her not as a person, a mother struggling to keep her world from spinning apart, but as an expense. An unreliable, inefficient, and ultimately replaceable expense. He had made that abundantly clear last week when she'd asked for a small advance. The refusal had been swift and cold, a door slammed shut in her face. Her greatest trial, however, arrived precisely at 2 o'clock every afternoon, regular as a bitter tide. Mr. Abernathy. He was a man of moderate means but immense cruelty, a petty tyrant who had chosen the corner spoon as his kingdom and its staff as his subjects. He strode in, shaking his expensive umbrella with a flourish that sent droplets spattering across the freshly mopped floor. He was immaculately dressed in a crisp suit, a stark contrast to the diner's worn-out decor, and he carried himself with an air of unearned superiority. He never sat at the same table twice, a small power play designed to keep the waitstaff on edge. Today, he chose a booth directly in the center of the room, a throne from which he could survey his domain. Maya's heart sank. It was her section. She took a deep breath, plastered on her professional smile, and walked toward him, her notepad a flimsy shield against the assault she knew was coming. "The usual, Mr. Abernathy?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. He didn't look at her. He was busy scrutinizing the salt shaker as if it had personally offended him. "Is the coffee fresh, or has it been stewing since dawn like everything else in this establishment?" he sneered, his voice loud enough for the other patrons to hear. "I just made a fresh pot, sir," Maya replied, her jaw tight. "We'll see about that," he muttered, finally deigning to look at her, his eyes scanning her uniform with disdain. "And I want my steak rare. Not medium rare. Not blue. Rare. If your cook can't manage that simple instruction, perhaps he should find a new profession." "As should you." Maya simply nodded, her pen scratching against the paper. The words were a familiar poison, and she had built up a fragile immunity. She retreated to the kitchen, the bell on the door jingling its melancholy tune behind her. As she turned, it jingled again. A new customer stood silhouetted against the gray light. He was enormous, a mountain of black leather and faded denim. A thick, gray-streaked beard covered the lower half of his face, and his eyes, deep-set beneath a furrowed brow, seemed to absorb the light in the room. Tattoos snaked up his neck and disappeared into his grizzled hair. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that was at odds with his intimidating size, the heels of his heavy boots making a soft, solid sound on the tile. The air in the diner shifted. The old men fell silent. The trucker at the counter straightened his back. Fear, primal and unspoken, had walked in the door. The biker scanned the room, his gaze lingering for a moment on Mr. Abernathy before settling on an empty booth in the corner. Maya's corner. He slid into the worn vinyl seat, the leather of his vest creaking like a ship's hull. On the back of the vest was a large, intricate patch, a stylized eagle with its wings spread wide, clutching a wrench in one talon and a lightning bolt in the other. Beneath it, in stark white letters, were the words, Vanguard Vets MC, and pinned just above his heart was a small, tarnished insignia she recognized from a lifetime ago. A pin her father used to wear. Her father. The thought was a sudden, sharp ache in her chest. He had been a mechanic, a man with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands, but he had also been a soldier. A man who spoke of brotherhood and loyalty in a way she never fully understood until he was gone. He'd left behind little more than a box of old photos, a folded flag, and the faint, lingering scent of motor oil and honor. Shaking off the sudden wave of memory, Maya approached the biker's table. Up close, he was even more imposing. The lines on his face told stories of long miles and hard sun. He looked up at her, and his eyes weren't cold as she'd expected. They were just, still. Like a deep, quiet lake. "Coffee, ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble, like gravel being poured onto a road. "Black." She nodded, relieved by his simple politeness, and turned to fetch his order. As she did, Mr. Abernathy's voice cut through the diner's quiet tension like a whip. "Waitress. Is there a problem? Did you get lost on the way to the kitchen? I'm not paying to sit here and starve." Maya's shoulders slumped. She delivered the coffee to the biker, who gave her a short, almost imperceptible nod. As she turned back to Abernathy's table with his coffee, her hand trembled slightly. She could feel the biker's eyes on her back. She felt every stare in the room. She placed the cup carefully on the table. Abernathy picked it up, took a loud, theatrical sip, and then slammed it back down, sloshing hot coffee across the formica. "This is lukewarm filth," he bellowed, shoving the cup away. "Are you incompetent? Is that it? Or are you just lazy?" I'm sorry, sir. "I'll get you another cup," Maya stammered, her face burning with humiliation. "Don't bother," he spat. "You've already ruined my appetite for it." He leaned back, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You know, Henderson should have fired you months ago. You're a disgrace to this place." Tears pricked at the back of her eyes. She fought them back, refusing to give him the satisfaction. But his words struck a raw nerve. He was echoing her deepest fears. That she wasn't good enough. That she would fail. That she would lose this job, the only thing keeping her and Leo from complete destitution. The ground felt like it was falling away beneath her feet. It was then that she glanced over at the biker. He was watching the scene unfold, his expression unreadable, his big hands resting calmly on the table. In that moment of pure, suffocating desperation, an old memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Her father, sitting at their kitchen table, cleaning his old service pin. He was showing her something, a small, discreet gesture. "If you ever see a brother, and you're in a real jam," he had told her, his voice serious, "and you can't speak it, you show them this. They'll know. It means a soldier's family needs help." He had her practice it. A simple, almost unnoticeable motion, tapping the side of her temple twice with her index finger, then drawing a straight line down her cheek. A silent tear. A call for aid. She had thought it was just one of her father's old stories, a piece of folklore from a world she didn't belong to. But now, looking at the pin on the biker's vest, a desperate, irrational hope surged through her. He was one of them. A brother. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Abernathy was still ranting, his voice a drone of insults. She felt trapped, cornered, and utterly alone. With a hand that shook so badly she could barely control it, she raised it as if to push a stray strand of hair from her face. Her eyes met the biker's across the room. Tap, tap. Then, a slow, deliberate line drawn down her cheek. It was a prayer whispered into a storm. A message in a bottle cast into a violent sea. For a second, nothing happened. The biker's expression didn't change. He just watched her. A wave of cold certainty washed over Maya. She was a fool. It was a childish fantasy. A stranger in a diner wasn't going to save her. The biker slowly blinked, once. Then he turned his attention back to his menu as if nothing had happened. Disappointment, sharp and bitter, settled in Maya's stomach. Abernathy, having finally exhausted his tirade, waved a dismissive hand at her. Just bring my steak. And try not to contaminate it with your incompetence. Maya fled to the kitchen, her composure finally breaking. She leaned against the cool metal of the refrigerator, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The cook, a kind man named Sal, gave her a sympathetic look but said nothing. There was nothing to say. The biker ate his meal in silence. He ordered a slice of apple pie and finished every crumb. When he was done, he walked to the counter. Maya rang him up, her eyes fixed on the register, unable to meet his gaze. He placed a $50 bill on the counter for a $10 meal. Keep the change, he rumbled. Before she could protest, he turned and walked out, the bell on the door marking his departure. Maya stared at the money, a confusing mix of gratitude and despair swirling within her. It was a kind gesture, more than she'd made all day, but it felt like a consolation prize. A pity tip. The secret sign, the desperate plea, had meant nothing. It was just a story. Her father's ghost couldn't help her now. Mr. Abernathy finished his steak, complained that it was overcooked despite eating every bite, and demanded it be taken off his bill. Mr. Henderson, ever the coward, obliged immediately. Abernathy left without leaving a single cent, a smug, triumphant look on his face. As the door closed behind him, Henderson stormed out of his office. Maya. What did I tell you about upsetting the regulars? He snapped, his face red. That's the third time this month he's had a free meal on your shift. One more incident like this, and you're gone. Do you understand me? Gone. She understood. All too well. The rest of the day passed in a blur of quiet misery. The $50 tip from the biker felt like a small, warm stone in her pocket, a temporary reprieve from the crushing cold of her reality. The days that followed were no better. The rain finally stopped, but the gray pallor remained, both in the sky and in her spirit. Leo's cough worsened, and a new notice arrived in the mail, this one from the landlord, its bold, red letters screaming, "Final notice of eviction." Hope, which had flickered so briefly in the diner that day, was now extinguished completely. She had been foolish to put her faith in a stranger, in a ghost's gesture. The world was a hard, uncaring place, and she was on her own. She worked double shifts, her feet aching and her soul weary, the memory of the biker and her desperate signal fading into just another painful reminder of her own helplessness. It was a Tuesday, a week later. The diner was dead again. The afternoon sun was weak, casting long, melancholic shadows across the empty booths. Maya was wiping down the counter, her movements slow and automatic, her mind 1,000 miles away, tangled in a web of numbers that would never add up. And then she heard it. It started as a low, deep vibration, a thrumming she felt in the soles of her worn-out shoes before she could properly hear it. It was a sound that didn't belong in the quiet suburban street. It grew steadily, a resonant hum that became a rumble, then a growl, and finally, a deafening, ground-shaking roar. The windows of the diner began to rattle in their frames. The coffee in the pot rippled. Mr. Henderson came running out of his office, his face pale with alarm. What in God's name is that? An earthquake? Maya looked out the window, and her breath caught in her throat. They came over the rise in the road not as a group, but as an army. A river of chrome and steel that flowed into the diner's parking lot, a tidal wave of polished metal and black leather. There were dozens of them, then 50, then 100. The line of motorcycles seemed endless, filling every parking space, lining the curb, spilling out onto the street. They moved with a disciplined precision, parking their bikes in neat, orderly rows. The roar of their engines, which had shaken the very foundations of the building, was cut off one by one, replaced by an even more intimidating silence. The few customers inside stared, their faces pressed against the glass, their mouths agape. Mr. Henderson fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. "I'm calling the police. It's a gang. They're going to rob us." But they weren't acting like a gang. They dismounted calmly, their movements measured and purposeful. They were a mix of ages, from young men with hard eyes to grizzled veterans who looked like they were carved from granite. And on the back of every single leather vest was the same patch: the eagle, the wrench, the lightning bolt. The Vanguard Vets. The bell on the diner door jingled. The man who walked in was the same biker from the week before. He moved through the stunned silence, his boots marking a steady rhythm on the floor. He stopped directly in front of Maya's counter. He took off his sunglasses, and his eyes were just as she remembered them. Deep and still. "Maya," he said. It wasn't a question. He knew her name. "My name is Cole. Friends call me Sarge," he gestured with his thumb back toward the army of men outside. "We need some tables." Maya could only stare, speechless. Mr. Henderson, hiding behind the kitchen door, whimpered. Sarge's gaze softened. He pointed to the tarnished pin on his vest. "Your father, Corporal John Evans. He pulled me out of a burning Humvee outside of Fallujah. Never left a man behind, he'd say. He saved my life that day." He paused, letting the words sink in. "He also designed this signal." He gently tapped his temple twice, then drew a line down his cheek. "For family. He told me if I ever saw his girl, I should check in on her. And if she ever made the sign, it meant the wolves were at her door." Tears welled in Maya's eyes, hot and sudden. Not tears of sadness or fear, but of an overwhelming, incomprehensible relief. She hadn't been a fool. Her father's story was real. Her prayer had been heard. "We're family," Sarge said, his voice thick with conviction. "And the Vanguard protects its own. Always." At his signal, the bikers began to file into the diner. They filled every booth, every stool at the counter, their quiet presence more powerful than any shout. They were polite. They said, "Please," and "Thank you." They treated Maya not like a servant, but like royalty. They all ordered the most expensive items on the menu, and they all asked for coffee. Sal, the cook, worked like a man possessed, a wide grin splitting his face. Mr. Henderson just watched from his office, his jaw on the floor. For the next hour, Maya was a whirlwind of motion, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel tired. She felt energized, carried along by the quiet strength that now filled the room. Each order was taken, each plate delivered. And with each one, a biker would press a folded bill into her hand. A 20. A 50. 100. Her apron pockets, usually heavy with a few coins, were soon overflowing. As the last plates were being cleared, Sarge walked over to her. He placed a thick, white envelope on the counter. "This is from the club's emergency fund," he said quietly. "It'll cover your rent for the next year. And all of Leo's medical bills are taken care of. He has an appointment with a top pediatric pulmonologist in the city next Friday. One of our brothers is a doctor there. It's all been arranged." Maya opened the envelope. Her hands trembled as she saw the stacks of cash inside. It was more money than she had seen in her entire life. She looked up at Sarge, her vision blurred by tears. I don't know what to say. How can I ever repay you?" Sarge placed a large, calloused hand gently on her shoulder. "Your father already paid. This is just us settling a debt. You don't owe us a thing. Just then, the bell on the door jingled again. Mr. Abernathy walked in, his face a mask of arrogant impatience. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening in shock and fear as he took in the scene. 100 bikers, all staring directly at him. The diner was so quiet you could hear the hum of the neon sign. Abernathy turned to leave, but Sarge's voice stopped him cold. Mr. Abernathy. We were hoping you'd stop by. Sarge walked calmly toward him. He wasn't menacing, but the sheer force of his presence was suffocating. We've been hearing some things about you, Sarge said, his voice dangerously low. About how you treat people. Specifically, how you treat this young lady, he gestured toward Maya. We don't like bullies. Abernathy stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, Sarge continued. We did a little research. Abernathy Construction. You have the city contract for the new bypass, don't you? Big project. Very profitable, he smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. Funny thing is, the city councilman who oversees that contract. He's our chapter vice president's brother-in-law. And the 3 biggest trucking companies you subcontract with? They're all owned and operated by Vanguard vets. The color drained from Abernathy's face. He understood the implication perfectly. From now on, Sarge said, his voice like cold steel, you will come into this diner every day. You will order a meal. You will be polite. And you will leave a 50% tip. Every single time. Or you can watch your whole professional life crumble to dust. Are we clear? Abernathy could only nod, his body trembling. Sarge then turned his attention to Mr. Henderson, who was trying to make himself invisible in the doorway of his office. And you, Sarge said, his voice losing its edge but none of its authority. Maya is the best thing about this place. You're going to give her a raise. A significant one. And from now on, you will treat her with the respect she deserves. Because this diner is now under our protection. Any problems, you answer to me. Henderson nodded so vigorously his head seemed to wobble. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. She's my best employee. A gem. With the diner's internal affairs settled, the bikers began to rise. They paid their bills in cash, leaving the register overflowing. They filed out as quietly and efficiently as they had arrived. Sarge was the last to leave. He stopped at the door and turned back to Maya. If you or your boy ever need anything at all, you call me, he said, pressing a card into her hand. He gave her a final, warm nod, a gesture that conveyed a world of respect and solidarity. Then he was gone. Maya stood in the middle of the diner, the envelope in one hand, the business card in the other, and watched as the river of chrome and steel flowed back out of the parking lot. The bikers mounted their machines, and as one, they started their engines. The sound was no longer frightening. It was a symphony. A roar of triumph, of loyalty, of family. It was the sound of salvation. They rode away, leaving behind a profound silence, a stunned but grateful boss, a terrified bully, and a young woman whose life had been irrevocably changed. Her world was no longer a cage. It was a place of possibility. The gray sky outside hadn't changed, but for the first time in a long time, Maya could see the sun waiting just behind the clouds. She was not alone. She had a family. A loud, intimidating, leather-clad family of guardians who rode on wings of steel. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she and Leo were going to be all right. Kindness, she realized, sometimes comes in the most unexpected forms, and a father's honor, once given, never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to ride in and settle the debt.